in a more positive light.
Thanks for your question.
Thank you.
Second question is from Tunde Hinton. Sorry, is Tunde here?
Yes, I'm here.
Would you like to?
Yeah, but my question is, what measures would you put in place to solve the borough's housing crisis in terms of affordability?
Okay, measures put in place to solve the borough's housing crisis. So we'll start with Sarah Jones.
Well, as I mentioned in my answer to the first question, Croydon is facing an absolute housing crisis. We've heard in previous hustings that Gavin talks about how he wants to support more affordable housing, but at the same time he attacks those who want to deliver it. He says that he wants us to not end up as a society where only the small privileged elite can afford to buy their own home, but I'm sorry, we're there already in Croydon. Under Gavin's watch, we have home ownership at its lowest levels for 30 years. We have the average age of the first-time buyer gone up to 33. Homelessness in London, shamefully, is up by 80%. We have 30,000 people in Croydon living in insecure private rented accommodation, and rents have gone up 10% just in the last year. We have the gap between housing supply and demand due to reach £1.3 million homes by 2020. So I've worked in housing. I'm a director of a housing association. I build housing, and I also used to work for Shelter, the homeless charity. And I know that only Labour's policies will deliver for Croydon. We are going to build 200,000 homes a year. That's 1 million homes by 2020.
Where?
We are going to make sure that first-time buyers have priority within that system. We are going to reform private renting so that we get rid of the letting agency fees that you pay when you first rent. We're going to introduce 3-year fixed tenancies, and within that there's going to be a cap on how much your rents can increase. We're going to stop foreign buyers buying up properties, which is a real problem in Croydon, and we're going to make sure they pay more in tax and that people who have empty homes pay more as well. The only way to tackle the housing crisis is to tackle the lack of supply, and that is what Labour government will do.
Okay, thank you. Next on the housing issue, Esther Sutton.
There are huge housing developments going up currently in Croydon town centre, but none of them are affordable for local residents. Housing in Croydon has been increasingly become assets for investors rather than homes for families. Croydon is the 3rd highest borough in London in terms of numbers of homeless families with children living in B&Bs. This is unacceptable. Croydon Council has lost its significance as a housing provider through the Right to Buy scheme. And the growth of the private rented sector in Croydon Town Centre has risen with outrageously high rents and inadequate tenancy arrangements. We would want to see a huge increase in social housing in Croydon Town Centre, with all of our families being adequately housed.
Thank you. Martin Camden.
Right, well, I want to get the charitable sector involvement a lot more. So I want government to work, local and national government to work closely with charities to really address those needs that the mainstream sort of capitalist system is supposed to meet. With capitalism, if it's not profitable, it doesn't get attended to. So this is where the charitable sector comes in. I want to support any organisation that's providing decent quality, satisfactory emergency accommodation, the kind of accommodation that perhaps the YMCA provides, that kind of accommodation. Also social housing, I think having a massive waiting list is ridiculous. I've got ideas as to how to bring that waiting list down, but mainly it's working with the charitable sector, working with housing associations. What else can I say on that? Well, I'll leave it at that for now. Rent control. I want rent control and security of tenure improvements. I want to, like in the rest of Europe, renting is more attractive than buying. Home ownership is not the answer. This is rubbish. Years ago you could buy a house with 1 salary, then it was 2. Right now it's probably 2.5 or 3. This is a ridiculous trend. We've got to make renting more attractive than home ownership.
Thank you very much. Gavin Barwell.
Well, Sarah was right on one thing. The fundamental problem is we haven't been building enough houses. Although she wasn't honest enough to admit that house building reached an all-time low under the last Labour government. It's recovered under this government, but not by enough. So we need to build more houses, but then I passionately believe most people in Croydon want to own their own home. They want the security of owning their own place. And it is the explicit policy of the current Labour Council in Croydon to reduce the number of people in Croydon that own their own home. They've said that over half of all the new houses built outside the town centre must be council or housing association or shared ownership. And that is going to mean, over time, fewer and fewer people owning their own homes outright. It's going to make it harder for people. Our policy is to build starter homes that can only be sold to first-time buyers, not to foreign landlords, not just to foreign investors or buy-to-let landlords, and they will be sold 20% below the market price. Our policy is to help people, reducing the size of the deposits they have to pay when they buy a home. We have changed the stamp duty system, so if you buy an average priced home in Croydon, you pay £4,500 less tax than you paid under a Labour government. And in the private rented sector, the Labour Council is currently embarked on an insane policy to force every landlord to pay a tax to the council. And we have already seen landlords saying that they are going to be selling their properties and reinvesting in other boroughs. This policy is going to either increase rents for the people that are in the private sector, or it is going to lead to a reduction in the number of homes available, making the housing crisis even worse. So I agree with her that there is a problem, but sadly we have a council here in Croydon that is embarked on policies to make things worse, not better. What we need is a majority Conservative government that will introduce these policies that will make it much easier for young people, my children and yours, to have the chance to do what many of us have had the chance to do, which is to own our own property. And that is not going to be solved just by building homes alone. It requires specific action from the government to help people get the security they have from owning their own property.
Thank you. Peter Staveley.
One of the reasons why that we've got a shortage of housing is because when they were sold off in the 70s and 80s, they were the income from them was not fed back to the councils. If for any sales, we certainly want that of social housing, it must go back into the local council or housing association. But we're not particularly keen on the right to buy, but if there is, that's what we would want. I think our main focus on new housing is on brownfield. We would want to build 1 million houses on brownfield sites by the year 2020, nationally, of course. There's also a stock of, I think, about 279,000 empty properties. Measures need to take place to bring them back into the housing stock so that they are available. And the other thing that there is still going to have to be some other houses built, and that will probably involve some large-scale development. And we would want to, in line with our planning policies, we would want to ensure that there's a local referendum on any large-scale developments of the local voters. Thanks.
Thank you. James Fearnley.
I think housing goes to the heart of what we really need to be focused on, which is making sure that people are able to have the security of knowing they've got a safe roof over their head. And I think that is the fundamental focus of a lot of people in their communities, whether it's about themselves or their families. Now, there are 4 elements that I pick up on here. The first, I think we get a lot of agreement here from the panel that it's about supply. We have not tackled the supply issue over the past 30 years, and politicians of all stripes could have done better. I think we've made a good start in the coalition government, changing that round, but we need to do much more over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So that's the supply issue, that's what I think a lot of us will identify. So what can we do about it? I think we've got to be honest and say we need to build 300,000 new homes nationwide. We've got to make sure that we're getting the housing stock built and delivered. I agree with Peter actually on this about brownfield sites. For too often, public sector land has been held onto by government departments and local authorities and not released for development. I'd like to see the government intervene in this area. I'm a fan of markets in many ways. This is one area where the market has failed. We need to release brownfield sites, get the government building houses on those sites, and make sure that we, again, tackle that supply issue. Beyond that, what about helping people with deposits? Making sure that we are allowing people to go out there, buy their own home. I support the government's reforms in this area, the Help to Buy scheme that we've introduced. I think it's really important that we are helping on the demand side with a few things that we can do to make sure that we're encouraging people in the right way. We've identified a big weakness with our focus on home ownership. We think that we also need to make sure that people can go out there, rent their own place. That's why we've said anyone under 30 in London could get £2,000 from the government, a loan that will be paid back, to help them get a foot out the door and into their own place. £1,500 outside of London. That is a direct help to people who are often marginalised and forgotten about. I think it's really important. And then the final thing I'd say here is we think a rent-to-own scheme where the government buys land and actually makes sure that it's delivering stock for people to build up a stake over time in their own place.
Thanks, James. Thank you very much.
So much to say on that.
And finally, a question.
Yes, well, I think it's that Thatcher's had a dream of a property-owning democracy, but that's turned into a nightmare now for young people. Because it's not just about building more housing. Yes, of course, we must build more housing, but it's about building more council housing. Because the developers are building some housing. Where I work in Sutton, they're building housing, but most people can't afford the housing that they're building. So, and if you're looking at private, they're saying, I think it was Boris Johnson saying, building affordable housing, affordable rents. Affordable is 80% of market rents. Who can afford that? So it's not just about building more housing, the 200,000 houses that Labour said it's going to be building. I think it's about building more council housing. That's what the Trade Union and Socialist Coalition stands for. They're building more council housing, ending the right to buy, because that means that the social housing is just lost to people that can go into it. And so the new policy of the Tories to right to buy for housing associations, that again is just going to end social housing for most people. Private rents should be capped, there should be rent control, because at the moment, because there is no housing, private rents have just gone through the roof. So most young people are stuck at home because they can't afford private rents, they can't afford to buy any of their homes, because housing built in London at the moment is just for assets, not for people living in there. So for example, I work at Southwark Council, and I work in Southwark, and what they're doing, there are some redevelopments, there are some building, some housing, but most people can't afford that housing, so they're really socially cleansed from the borough. More ordinary people have been driven out of the borough because they can't afford those homes. So we're standing for building more council housing, not just building housing, because that's the only way people are going to be housed. Because in the future, then more and more people are being driven out of London because they can't afford to buy the housing in London. So that's what we stand for.
Thank you. I know members of the panel want to come back, but first of all, Cindy, that was your question. What's your take on the housing situation in Croydon at the moment, and what did you think of the answers that were given?
I think it's quite fortunate. I'm here with my husband, and we've been able to buy, but for the younger generation, they can't afford to buy anything or rent at the moment. I think it was quite funny that Gavin spoke about landlords when he was talking about the PRS, the private rental sector. But he didn't mention anything about the tenants who lived in those kind of properties, who lived in properties that may not be up to scratch. In terms of social housing, I think there's a big demand for social housing. I don't think there's an issue with having more affordable housing rather than intermediate rents. But yeah.
Okay. Before I come back to the panel, any other comments on housing?
Yes, I'd just like to say, first of all, no one's mentioned the issue of demand. Demand in London is growing considerably. There's spare capacity elsewhere in the country. Maybe people should be encouraged to move away from London elsewhere, and maybe we should do something to tackle the number of people who are pouring into London. Second question, everyone says they want to build houses. Where and how? How's it going to be paid for? Is it going to be the government buying property, buying land, paying for the houses, building the houses, selling the houses? How's it going to work? How are you going to get the land?
Right, we'll come back briefly on housing, then starting with Sarah Jones.
I find it quite extraordinary that someone who lives in Croydon and even more than that, has actually been the MP for the last 5 years, has nothing to offer for the number of families that are living in temporary accommodation, in bed and breakfast accommodation, in overcrowded accommodation, in inadequate private accommodation, in housing that has rocketing costs, and living, where they have families of more than one generation forced to live together because there's no housing. The idea that more affordable housing is a bad thing is the most extraordinary thing I've ever heard.
Okay. Gavin, Barwell, wants to come back on that?
Well, more affordable housing isn't a bad thing. What's a terrible thing, Sarah, is a political party that wants to take us back to the days when fewer and fewer people owned their own homes.
I want people to own their own home.
You've had your say, you replied to what you said. I'm all in favour of building more social housing. I see the need in my surgeries. But there has to be a balance. Your council has moved from a position where 30% of homes were meant to be council housing association to a position where 50% are meant to be. Now, if you follow that policy through for a number of years, the inevitable consequence is the proportion of people in this borough that own their home outright is going to reduce. The vast majority of the people I speak to, and Sunday was talking about examples, their aspiration, their desire is to own their own property. And the government should not turn its back on those people and say, do you know what, it's just too difficult. It's just too difficult to help you.
We're going
So
to
what
take
we're
them
going
out
to...
of stamp duty.
Okay.
You've spoken on actually on stamp duty. Those people are paying £4,500 less stamp duty today than they were under a Labour government. The stamp duty system is far more progressive.
Okay.
We have policies to do something to help young people get into home ownership. You want to make it harder.
Okay. Would anyone else like to come back on housing? We'll go to the next question. Okay, first.
Well, yes, if we make renting more attractive, renting by and large is significantly cheaper than a mortgage, what do I say on this? There's lots of spin-off things, renting. Why do people want to buy houses? Gavin mentioned security. Now, if renting was cheaper and more secure, then people had freedom of movement. If Croydon was overcrowded, and other parts of the country not overcrowded, it's easy to move there, easy to get quality housing at a reasonable rent, mobility, and then the problems will start solving themselves. Get the foundation right.
All right, thank you. James Fearnley?
Thanks. I'll come back on some of the specific points. You raised a good point about how do we fund this and how do we have a roadmap going forward to build houses. We've said within the first year we publish a clear plan to make sure that we're building those 300,000 new homes, which has set out all the detail. We've already said we want to build 10 garden cities throughout the southeast and elsewhere, working with local communities to expand existing towns. So that's probably where we would find some extra capacity. On the point about landlords, I agree, actually. What this coalition government has done is given more powers to councils to tackle road landlords. And I watched a programme where in Tower Hamlets, they'd gone in and there was this hit squad that actually tackled road landlords and were a disgrace, quite frankly, the way they were treating their tenants. And I think that is the way we tackle this issue, by giving specific powers to councils to do it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Where are we going to get the money to build more housing? The companies are not building at the moment because there's no profits in building those houses, so that's why they're not building. So what we're campaigning is to nationalise those house building companies. Because young people are unemployed at the moment, and there's lots of unemployment at the moment, so nationalise those house building companies, put those young people to work, building more housing. And that's the only way we're going to do it. Unfortunately, the Tories are turning their back in the poorest in society. That's where the Tories are. They're turning their back in the poorest in society and are not building social housing. There is enough money to do that, but it's where you want to spend the money in the government. That's where we're
Doesn't nationalising cost money?
Yes. No, nationalising does not cost money. It's only on proven need, nationalising. That's what we would say.
Peter Staveley?
Yes, there is a cost in building new housing, but largely it should be self-financing. The difficult bit will be when you're building on brownfield sites, there is the cost of the decontamination and generally cleaning the site. So we would incentivise the developers by giving them relatively modest grant to pay for that decontamination in the same way that was done for the Olympics and subsequent development around there. We would also remove from stamp duty any houses that are built on those brownfield sites up to the first £250,000.
Okay, and Esther Sutton, finally on housing.
Just on what Peter was saying about where to build. I think nobody's mentioned yet the enormous amount of empty property in Croydon, and if the council were able to buy that up and change the usage into housing, that would make a massive impact in housing in central Croydon.
Thank you very much, everybody.
One last thing.
Very, very quickly.
Basically, I want to incentivise the private sector to do the right thing, not just in housing, in all areas.
Okay.
Incentivise the private sector to do the right thing.
Thank you very much, everybody. Question 3. Is Roxana here? Excellent. I'd like to ask you a question.
What I want to ask is a real problem with school places for children, and what would you do to alleviate these problems?
Fantastic, thank you. Esther Sutton.
Well, I think just generally, child development needs to be essential, be at the heart of every policy for Croydon. And there are many factors going into restricting the full development of our young people so that they can access any level of learning, and that might be poverty, it might be deprivation. So we need to look at everything as a community and get it right. In terms of school places, we need to recognise that Croydon's population will continue to rise, and therefore we need to invest in our schools to ensure that we have sufficient school places. The Green Party would like to see a devolution of funding and decision making on education to local authority level, and so there would be a key role for Croydon Council to play in planning and admissions policy and equality of access for everybody, because they're the local council, they would be best placed to know where the schools need to be built, where's the greatest demand. So devolution of funding for school places.
Thank you very much. Martin Camden, school places.
School places, right. Well, education's a big one. I mean, I'm disillusioned with the political system. I'm also disillusioned with the education system. In fact, there's a growing movement across the world that's disillusioned in mainstream education thinking. All over the world, there's growing interest in homeschooling. There's also a growing interest in something called unschooling. If you don't know what these things are, you should Google them. Basically, on my sort of policy document here, there's a slogan of mine: if it's not interesting, it's not education. I hated my school years. I was not happy when I went to university. It's remarkable that I've ended up as sane as I am. But I mean, no, seriously, I mean, the Royal Society of Arts have videos on the internet. What do they call it? Oh God, RSA Animate. Look up RSA Animate. One's on education. It's mind blowing. And they're saying that the modern world needs creativity more than anything else. And what the education system does is systematically destroy creativity. And it's all in a nutshell. It's not fun. It's not education. And we're forcing because there's a job shortage, and everybody thinks, therefore we have to get massive qualifications in order to stand a chance of getting a job. It's madness. The whole setup is madness. And if you want to know the answer, talk to me.
Thank you very much. Gavin Barwell.
So it's a great question, and it's one of the big challenges that Croydon is facing over the next 5 years. The last Labour government was spending nearly all of the education capital budget refurbishing existing schools, and actually we didn't see a penny of that in Croydon. Under this government, over the last 5 years, we've seen a 7-fold increase in the amount of money coming to Croydon Council to provide new school places. And the council, in my opinion, under both parties, has done a really good job using that money, trying to meet the growing need that we have initially in primary, and it's soon going to feed through into secondary spaces. So I've worked really hard as the MP to get that money. I'm very proud of that 7-fold increase. But as well as the money that is going to the council, we also have the free school programme. And that's a really important political choice at this election, because we've done really well out of that budget as well. A significant chunk of it coming to Croydon. We recently had an announcement that the Advertiser Trust would open a Hindu ethos school here in Croydon, and that Wellington Grammar School will be opening a secondary school here in the borough. Both of those schools, I think, are going to prove really popular with local parents. I've had a great response already to the announcement, and the Labour Party wants to do away with that free school programme. So we're going to be back to the days when most of the schools in the borough are under the control of the local authority. So we need to make sure that we make that provision in terms of number of places, but I'm equally passionate about trying to ensure we get a really diverse range of people running our schools so that the people in the borough get a real choice of different providers. They can find the right school that's right for their child. We've got a good record over the last 5 years, but there is a lot more to do to make sure we meet this explosion in demand that we've seen.
Thank you very much. Next on school places, Peter Staveley.
We also want choice. We want to make sure that the type of school that is available for the what each child wants. So, for example, those who wish to go into academia, there will be grammar schools in every town. I'm interested to hear about Bonington Grammar School extending into this borough. If it's a selective education school, I'm not worried about whether it's called grammar or not. That's really brilliant news for the town. By the way, we're not talking about going back to 11 plus. You should be able to go into a selective education at the time that is appropriate to your development. We also want to encourage schools that have vocational training. Too often people who are not academically minded are pushed into academia when they would be much better off with vocation. So we want to encourage that. On the issue of the number of places, that is just simply down to a lack of planning, both in terms of the level of population and politicians of various parties not doing the planning they should have done. Obviously that's got to be addressed and dealt with.
Thank you very much. James Fearnley.
We've got to ensure that schools get the funding they need. Education is really key, and we've got to protect that budget. Now, we've said we will make sure that that budget is protected nationwide against any cuts. It's often the case that in the run-up to general elections, politicians say, I'm not going to name a red line, I'm not going to say this is subject to no negotiation. And Nick Clegg did that today. He said the education budget has to be protected in real terms over the next 5 years. That's a red line if we were negotiating with any party to form the next government. So you will be safe in the knowledge that your child will have the funding they need going forward. We've built on a good legacy, I think, over the past 5 years in terms of the pupil premium, getting funding to schools to make sure that disadvantaged pupils get the funding they need to get a good start in life that they deserve. The third thing I'd identify here as well is I think you also want to know that your child is being taught the right thing at school. We've said we want a minimum curriculum within all schools. I guarantee that you'll get taught by a qualified teacher. You also need a curriculum for life. It's all about life skills as well, finance, politics, sex education. I think those are the most important things when we look at education, and I'm proud that my party has that platform.
Thank you. April Ashley next.
I think what every parent wants is a good local school for their child, and what we're having is not good local schools, and we do need to fund and build more local schools. And that's why we're completely opposed to academies and free schools and grammar schools. We need local comprehensive schools that is run and controlled by local councils. Because when we have academies and free schools open in an area, there's no cooperation or coordination in that area. So what we have is academies and free schools in areas where they may not necessarily be needed, instead of cooperation or coordination with the local council, and that's what we need. So there's money being put in academies and free schools, but there's no accountability. Who are they accountable to, these academies and free schools? Not to the local authority, who are accountable through, you're voting for them, etc. So we don't support academies or free schools, especially when free schools, teachers don't have to have qualified teacher status in many of those schools. And we know teachers are leaving education now in droves. Why? Because of all the pressure that's been put on them about targets and performance, etc. And they're leaving schools in droves. And what we want is a good education for our children. And what we haven't got that at the moment. All the government, the parts have been meddling education, but you know, they haven't really supported the children at school, supported education. And every parent wants a good local school, and you do need to fund that. And not taking money out of the education budget by having academies and free schools, etc., which I think is the beginning of privatisation of education.
Thank you. And finally, on the issue of school places, Sarah Jones.
Well, Croydon needs 4,500 school places by 2018, according to the latest figures I got from February this year. And there's a number of ways in which we make sure we've got enough school places and that they're the right school places. The first thing is the funding for education. The Conservatives have said that they will, in real terms, cut the education budget. We will not. That's the first thing.
Wrong.
Second thing is that the funding per pupil in Croydon is less than in Lambeth. It's a historical issue that we need to tackle, and I'm delighted that Ed Miliband last week when he came to Croydon said he would look at this. If you're in Lambeth, you get £6,000 per pupil. In Croydon, it's 4,800. So there's a gap just in terms of the amount of money that goes into each pupil's education. We would get rid of the failed free school experiment that the Conservatives have brought in. It's wasted £250 million putting schools in places that we don't need and not in places where we do need. We've seen free schools nearly open in Croydon and they're not. We've seen huge amounts of money wasted in that process. The free school system has not delivered the extra school places that we need. And then the second thing I say is we need the right teachers, and 50,000 teachers left the profession this year, which is the highest in 10 years because of Michael Gove's policies which have decimated their control over their own curriculum and their own pupils. So we want to see an end to unqualified teachers. In Croydon, this is an interesting statistic, in Croydon 7,400 pupils are taught by unqualified teachers. So we want teachers to be qualified, but then once they're qualified, we want to give them more flexibility with the curriculum so that they can have more control over what's taught. But under a new school inspector system, that will mean there's coordination locally about where the schools should go and where they're provided so that we can make sure every child in Croydon has an excellent school education.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to the panel in a second, but first of all, Roxana, that was your question. What do you think about what you've heard so far?
I mean, what's been said flags up other things concerns mine. It's standards of school. I mean, most people will know that parents will go up to places in school they deem to be the best. So then what you have are people moving homes and things like that. I don't know people aware of what Year 6 children are put through so they can pass the grammar school examinations, because parents are fighting hard for their children to get into schools. The other thing that because we should have across the board in our borough schools that we're proud of, that any parent would be able to say if they didn't get their first, second or third choice, they're happy for their child to go to that school. Another thing that really concerns me as well is the amount of children that are in primary schools that have special needs that are going without the parents being able to access the support for those children. It's a long drawn out process, too long. And it's not political, it's difficult for parents to understand that process, to get help for their children. And as for teachers, I know my son's high school, they went to Canada to recruit teachers because they had so many teachers that had left. And it's also I want to say in respect to teachers as well, they've put through an awful lot in schools. What they have to endure day in, day out sometimes in these schools is disgusting. So we need to think about the whole picture of raising the standards of our schools, the behaviour of our children, and as a community that we can stand as Croydon and say we are proud of our education system, we are proud to be living in Croydon, and we are proud of the children we are steering to the future, because these children in Croydon are going to be sitting there in years to come. And if we're not providing them with the platform, then how are we going to sit there in years to come and say, and have the same discussions year on, and say, well, years ago my mum sat in a hustings meeting and said this, and I'm saying exactly the same thing. So for me, it's a big problem.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll come back to
Sarah's answer had 5 factual errors in it, so let me just very quickly correct them. The Conservative policy is to protect the per-pupil funding in the education budget. That is a slightly less generous pledge than the Liberal Democrats, but it is more generous than what the Labour Party is offering. She talked about the funding formula by which the budget is divided up around the country. It's great to hear Miliband wants to do something about that. He was a member of the government that gave us the unfair funding formula in the first place. We're getting a 6% increase in our schools budget this April because we have an MP that has fought to change the funding formula. To hear the Labour candidate come along and say, oh, this is terrible, it's the Labour government that gave us this funding formula. Error number 3, free schools. Croydon gets a bigger share of the free schools budget than it does of the general education capital budget. So if you get rid of free schools, you're actually damaging the prospects of providing school places in this borough. She talked about control of the curriculum. Under this government, there are 4,000 academies. They don't have to follow the national curriculum. This government has freed thousands of schools from having to follow a national curriculum and do what the government says. So for her to talk about freedom from the curriculum is a bit rich. And finally, unqualified teachers. There are fewer unqualified teachers in the country and in Croydon than there were in 2010 under the Labour government. So one answer, 5 basic factual errors.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's good to see Gavin getting riled. He does it when he knows he's wrong. We will protect the education budget. Yours will go down in real terms. You know that.
Will you protect it per pupil?
You know that
Will you
the
protect it
reasonable
per
system
pupil?
has wasted £250
Will you
million.
protect it per pupil
You
when
know
the
that
numbers
there's
of
been a
people are increasing?
56% increase in the number of unqualified teachers over the last year. Your facts are wrong, and you just have to talk to the parents of Croydon to know these things. People are worried, teachers are worried. You were at the AUT hustings last week when teachers were giving you all kinds of issues that they're worried about. And, you know, my priority is not to try and point score with you. My priority is to try and improve the schools in Croydon. And I will do that with the Labour government more than we ever
Very briefly, very
Is Sarah saying that a Labour government will protect the education budget per pupil? Because when pupil numbers are rising, as Roxanne said, it's not just enough to protect the budget in real terms, it has to be per pupil. Will a Labour government do that?
Very
yes or
quickly,
no?
Sarah, and then we'll
We're protecting the education budget in real terms. Yes,
All right, there you go.
Will you protect it from inflation?
Per pupil.
Well, I think I stand up for this one. Yes, it's the short answer. I'll put Jamie Oliver in charge of education. Did anybody see his TV series? He was making education interesting. That programme was amazing, but the academics in charge of the system they either don't understand or there's some reason why they're not listening. What we need is savvy people in charge, like Jamie Oliver, not just education. We need savvy people in charge of all the different ministries. But you know, if you want proof that academia doesn't work, look, this country is run by academics, and they're useless. We need savvy people like me, and we need savvy people like Jamie Oliver.
Thank you very much. James.
Very quickly on the funding issue, absolutely per pupil and in line with inflation is a Liberal Democrat promise. So that is our promise to you here, red line, our focus for the next 5 years. But I think teachers sometimes feel as though people talk down the profession and talk down some of the improvements we've made over the past 5 years. It's worth pointing out nationwide, 1 million more pupils are now being taught in a good or outstanding school than in 2010. I'm not saying everything's perfect, but that is an improvement in the right direction. I also want to pick up on one thing that I think is neglected when we talk about education. Child illiteracy is a national disgrace and is something we should all prioritise as politicians. And we've set out, we want to tackle child illiteracy, make sure it's eradicated. Every pupil should be able to leave primary school able to read and write, and that should be our absolute #1 priority. Everything else falls down if we don't achieve that.
Thank you very much.
And can I say, teachers are disillusioned because they come into teaching wanting to teach, and in too many schools they're doing endless crowd control. No teaching, all crowd. I got an answer to that. I'm an education psychologist, and I know what to do about it. Put me in charge, I will fix the problem.
Right. Thank you very much. Before we go on to the next question, a couple of things. First of all, we're all on social media tonight. Gareth there is filming us on Periscope. Which people can go on our Twitter page and
people that
can log on. Big Periscope app. Yeah, I'm very up with the technology. You can watch us live on Periscope. And also we're tweeting. Is it Croydon Debate hashtag? That's the one. At least we got that right. So you can just take part via social media, even though you're here. But lots of people, including myself, tend to do that. You can be in a room and still use the phone. So feel free, and for anyone who's watching, hello. The other thing I would like to say at this point, before I forget, is to thank everybody for their questions. It's very obvious that I won't get through every single question because we'll probably be here this time tomorrow. But what I've tried to do is at least make sure that as many sort of broad subject areas as possible are covered. Speaking of which, we had a lot of questions on this next subject, but by far the most, and it also came out on top in our recent pre-election survey. So this is one question that we kind of tried to summarise broadly what was asked, and that is that it's about the NHS. And very simply, what will your party do to make sure Croydon residents receive a quality and availability of healthcare fitting for a growing town with close to 400,000 residents? And we'll start with Martin Camden.
Yeah, I'll take a leaf out of Gavin's book and stand up. Yeah, well, I'm very worried about waiting lists. Waiting lists is, there are actually people dying on waiting lists. The type turning up at May Day or Croydon University Hospitals, it's now called, and you may have a serious complaint, and you might have to wait a hell of a long time in pain, waiting to be seen, waiting for hospital treatment. My mother had to wait 9 months for a hernia operation, and she was in serious pain for 9 months. And this is an 85-year-old lady. This is not right. There's some aspects of the system we all know are wrong. We all know it needs fixing. It has to be fixing. And another problem is, I see, it's the same sustainability. That there have to be some changes made. I want the national health system to stay free at the point of delivery in most cases anyway. But there's a sustainability problem. If we don't come up with really clever solutions to sustainability problems, sooner or later we'll be forced to hand it over. I said we'll be forced to hand it over to the private sector. Politicians have got to make some tough decisions to make the NHS viable and sustainable. Otherwise, it'll be ripped out of their hands, private sector, and none of us are really happy with that.
Thank you very much. Next on the topic of the NHS, Gavin Barwell.
3 quick things, Glenn. First of all, my wife works for the NHS. I had cancer when I was a young child and saved my life. My father got the most amazing care at the end of his life when he had Alzheimer's from the NHS, so I am incredibly passionate about it. I think there are 3 things that we need to do. First of all, we need to make sure the money is in place. At a national level, both the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats have committed to the £8 billion that the independent investigation said was required. Ed Miliband has yet to do that. But then there's also this question again of the formula, how the cake is cut up. I've got changes from the formula we inherited from Labour. This year our local NHS is seeing a 6% increase. We've just got capital funding for a brand new, modern, larger A&E at our local hospital. So there's lots of good news there on the funding front. The second issue, I think, is about the quality of human care. I think the mid-staffs scandal showed us some of what was wrong in our NHS. We need to make sure people get the basic human nursing care that they require. And I think this sort of idea of a friends and family test, where you ask the staff at the hospital, would they be happy for their friends, their family, to be treated at that hospital? That's a good indicator of how well the hospital is doing. And the last thing I'd like to mention, Glenn, is a personal issue that I'm very committed to, which is the issue of mental health. I think for years and years, under governments of both parties, mental health has very much been the Cinderella service. It's not received the attention that it deserves. I took a private member's bill through Parliament to try and tackle the issue of discrimination that people often experience when they have mental health conditions. The government has just put a lot more money, the coalition government, into mental health care and is introducing the first ever targets in terms of the waiting times for people that need psychological therapy. So getting the funding right, making sure the quality of basic human care is right, and then also giving proper priority to people's mental health as well as their physical health would be my 3 priorities.
Thank you very much. Next, Peter Staveley.
Well, I have a lot of interest in the NHS. I did actually have an appointment at Croydon University Hospital this morning of an ongoing issue. So I know quite a lot about waiting times and appointments and things like that. But on the whole, the NHS is reasonable and getting better, but we want to improve it much more. We're going to put £12 billion into the NHS over the lifetime of the government, up to £3 billion a year. And that will pay for 20,000 more nurses, 8,000 more doctors, more midwives. We're going to put in £1.5 billion into mental health care to improve on that. A little thing that can cause a lot of distress when you're visiting hospitals is parking charges. We'll want to get rid of that, which you don't pay it in Scotland, so why pay it in England? And we'll introduce health boards, which are elected by the voters. So you will have total say, or a lot of say anyway, in how your NHS will be run. So we want to bring democracy and control back to the voters.
Thank you very much. James Barwell.
There are a lot of worried people out there concerned about privatisation of the NHS. And I want to say, private involvement in the NHS has barely moved over the past 5 years. I get lobbied a lot by people saying you've got to protect the NHS and stop it being privatised. I worry that people are raising this as an issue in order to try and talk down what we've done over the past 5 years. And I really want us to get rid of the politicisation of the NHS, because if I'm looking at going into this as an aspiring GP or nurse, I'd be really worried about the rhetoric around it. It needs to be safe in all political parties' hands. I want to pick up on the funding point. I think it's absolutely right that we give the NHS the funding it needs. There's an independent report published last year. We need to make sure that £8 billion every year goes into the NHS to plug the funding gap. That's really important. It's a priority. Mental health for too long has been ignored. We've said 20.5 billion investment over the next 5 years. And it's not just on the overall mental health focus that we need. It's also about children's mental health. For too long we've neglected that area, and we've said we want to prioritise making sure that children's mental health is tackled in the right way. We're going to set up a mental health task force and also a centre of expertise to make sure that we're looking into the right ways to treat people with mental health issues. I also want to pick up on the unsung heroes in many ways. Carers. Too often we forget about carers. We've said we want to give carers who look after people who are ill and elderly £250 a year just as a bonus and a recognition of the contribution they make, and also a carer's passport to look after people, to give them extra help to recognise the huge contribution they make to society through their unpaid help.
Thank you very much. Next, April Ashton.
I think the only way we can protect the NHS is basically to abolish the Health and Social Care Act that the Tories brought in 2012. Because the Health and Social Care Act means more and more privatisation of the NHS. So what we have with the Health and Social Care Act is that now health can be given to any qualified provider. The doctors are supposed to then give out contracts for services. But what you're seeing is the CCG, where the doctors are sitting on to give out their contract, they're going to more and more private contractors. And that is an absolute fact. And so what the Tories want, I'm afraid, is more and more like a US health service, where it's like an insurance company. And, well, that's what it is, I'm afraid. And that's what you're looking at, more health and sort of like healthcare system like the US. And so there is more and more privatisation in the NHS as we speak, and that will continue over the next few years if we don't get rid of the Health and Social Care Act, and not just the Act, but to get rid of privatisation out of the system. Now, we've got the PFI, the Private Finance Initiative, where hospitals are built by private companies, but what you're having, because the private companies want to make money out of the PFI, then the hospitals that are built are costing more and more money because the private companies have to make their profit. So the building a hospital costs really sort of triple the amount of if you built it by the government themselves and not have the privatise the PFI. And so there's about 60 billion that's owed in hospitals because of the Private Finance Initiative. So we would really cancel that debt. And the health service is just to be companies built by...
Thank you very much. Thank you.
The government.
Thank you. Sarah Jones.
4 years ago, my twins were born, and they were born premature. And they had premature lung disease, which meant they couldn't breathe. And they were rushed to the special care baby unit in May Day, and the doctors and nurses fought through the night to save their lives. And 2 weeks later, I was able to take them home. I think we all have similar stories of when we've used the NHS and when we've appreciated how much we need it. And let's look at the reality of what's happened over the last 5 years. Croydon University Hospital was the first in London to declare a major internal incident. 50,000 people in Croydon can't get a GP appointment within a week. Lots of our targets around A&E, around cancer weights are being missed. We've got some of the worst ambulance response times in London, with a 10% increase in critical cases because of the lack of services in the community looking after people. We've got carers who are being given, no more than 15 minutes to look after individual people in their home. We've got people getting sicker, needing to use hospitals more. So our plan for the NHS, which is costed, we know where the money is coming from, is to have a £2.5 billion per year time to care fund, which will pay for more doctors, more nurses and more carers. We will ban that 15-minute rule for carers in the community. We will bring health and social care together so that the services work for people better and people can stay out of hospital more. And we will introduce a new 48-hour target to see your GP. So you will be guaranteed to see a GP within 48 hours. The Tories, at very late on in the stage of the election, have promised to increase funding for the NHS, but they have no plans for where that money is going to come from. You can't save the NHS with an IOU, and you can't trust the Tories with the NHS.
Sarah, and finally, Esther Sutton.
I believe that our healthcare must be publicly funded and free at the point of use, and would oppose all NHS privatisation and the introduction of market systems into our healthcare. We would the Greens would ensure that the NHS is properly funded, properly staffed, and puts the patient back at the heart of the service. While it's great news that Mayday is set to benefit from a new A&E department, which is the work mainly of Dr. Kathleen Channing, the hospital as a whole is desperate for additional public funding, and it's unacceptable that our local hospital has to declare an major internal incident. The Green Party would want to inject £12 billion immediately into the NHS, which would fund restoration of free prescriptions and dental care, as well as meeting the funding shortfalls. Additionally, we'd want to see mental health as a much higher priority. But there's a bigger picture to all this. We need to work for preventative medicine as well. We need to look at outside factors such as deprivation, poor diet, lack of exercise, and environmental issues such as pollution, which are all impacting on health. In the long term, we want to address these issues and take the strain off the National Health Service.
Thank you very much. I'm going to come back here in a second, but any comments from the audience on the NHS?
My comment was just regarding privatisation. What would be quite interesting actually is to hear from each of you whether or not you actually support privatisation. And secondly, just some facts. In March, it was announced that the largest ever private sector kind of deal the NHS has done, worth £780 million. The privatisation of services within the NHS is actually happening. So for James to say that we haven't moved very far in 5 years, that's actually a fallacy. So it'd be very interesting to hear from each of you whether or not you actually support the privatisation of the NHS, and to say that it's not happening is not actually factual, because it is. And just another addendum to that, interestingly, more than half of the firms, the 11 firms that have deals with the NHS to provide these private services, have direct links to the Tory party. There are other funders, donors will have very close links. So I think we all need to be very open and honest about the situation we're facing.
I'll take a couple more comments, and I'm going to let everybody come back on this, because it's obviously a very important issue. The gentleman standing at the back.
Just a quick question. I think we've got this massive funding that's going to go into the Mayday Hospital. But what I'd like to know from the guys that are there, ladies, who is actually overall control of that? Because at the moment, it's totally disjointed. You go there, you've got Virgin Healthcare will provide initial support for you. Then you actually have Maida University Hospital providing additional care. But if you then go for follow-up from the minor injuries, you're then sent all the way to TUSC. How does that work for the people of Croydon under this fantastic system? And with the current budget that's in there, when this new hospital gets built, A&E, the current GPs in this area, they've got a contract signed up for another 2.5 years. So this hospital is going to be a white elephant in Croydon. What are you going to do during after selection to sort out Croydon University Hospital so people of Croydon can actually go to one hospital and stay there for all their care?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take a comment from the gentleman with his hand raised and then we'll come back. I appreciate it. No, sorry, so just the gentleman in the back and then I'll come to you. So, that's it, yeah.
Mr. Wilcox, Croydon Mental Health Forum. The privatisation of the NHS is well documented. Huge amounts is now gone to for-profit providers. It's all on record, Gavin. In plain English, with carers caring at home, when you recently privatised the care homes, I put Margaret Mead on the spot on this one as well, because it's getting a bit silly now. When wages are rock bottom, we do not attract the creme de la creme. It is an uncompetitive wage rate in a market where the best staff are going elsewhere. So if you pay rock bottom, you won't get the creme de la creme. Carers in care homes dropped from about £11 an hour to about £6.50 an hour. At the same time, the ones going to the homes to actually look after the old people or injured people like myself in their homes, they're on like £6.50 an hour and they don't get paid for travel time. And they have to travel. The wages have plummeted. You're losing quality staff. You've got to be more realistic around this. Thank you.
Thank you. And the gentleman here, and then we will come back to the panel. So there's lots of issues here too.
Yeah, everyone's made claims about the NHS, but Labour in particular has said that a central plank of their Labour policy is that they're only party capable of rescuing the NHS. And normally, with parties in opposition, you don't get a chance to have a look at the track record or their actual performance. But actually, in terms of the NHS, we do have an opportunity to judge the Labour Party on actual current track record. You only have to go down the M4 to Wales to see the wonderful nirvana, the paradise that we are promised by the Labour Party if they were to take over the English NHS. Are we getting 90%, 100%? No, we're getting 51% patient satisfaction in the Welsh NHS against a 65% satisfaction in the English NHS. The percentage of ambulances arriving within 8 minutes under a Labour-controlled 5-year Welsh NHS is 51%. It's funny this 51% keeps reoccurring. I wonder if that's the target for the English NHS. Is this a track record, Sarah, of rescuers of the NHS, or an abject apology for what you're going to do? Will you explain why it's only 51% patient satisfaction in Wales, and will you understand why Croydon Central voters will find it very hard to believe your breathtaking hypocrisy in rescuing the English NHS? It's actually Wales that needs to be rescued from Labour, not the other way around.
Okay, well we've got various comments there. What I'm going to do, I appreciate there's a lot to come back on. I'm going to go in the same order and I'm going to give you another kind of full 2-minute answer to come back on those points as you wish. So starting with Martin Camden.
Well, as I say, I don't want privatisation. I think if privatisation starts happening, it'll happen in random, uncoordinated ways, and we won't be happy with the result. And so sustainability, yes. Also organisational health. Again, there are experts in this world, all about organisational health. And the mental health system is the most dysfunctional system I have ever come across. Marvellous book by Patrick Lencioni called The Advantage, how organisational health trumps everything else in business. So sustainability, organisational health. One thing I haven't mentioned, my policy is to get the money by slashing the military budget. I think military should be for self-defence and peacekeeping only, and we should have nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction. That would release an enormous budget to address many of the concerns raised by other candidates. And what's the last point raised?
Wales.
Wales. Oh yes, customer. The other thing is, I'm a fanatic about customer satisfaction. In recent years, I've been applying for jobs as a customer satisfaction manager. I think we should be aiming for basically very high, 90% customer satisfaction with actual outcomes, and 100% satisfaction with process. Customer satisfaction process in government is lousy. The MP mechanism doesn't work very well. Every time I complain to an MP, he passes the letter to a minister, and I get a total fob-off back. Every time I've done it, total fob-off. Customer service in government is rubbish. We need to... If every piece of customer feedback was taken seriously and collated and put together into a sensible problem specification document and then worked on systematically to address the problems that people are complaining about on a daily basis, that's the way to go.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Gavin Barwell.
I'll do my best to cover 4 different questions in 2 minutes. BNOSA, privatisation. In the 5 years of the last Labour government, private delivery of contracts in the NHS rose from 0% to 5%. In the 5 years of this government, it's increased from 5% to 6%. I don't have a problem with private companies or charities delivering some NHS services, but actually the rate of growth of the private sector has slowed under this government. You wouldn't know that from Labour's rhetoric. Second question, I didn't catch the gentleman's name, but actually the contract for the urgent care centre ends at the time that the new department will come open, and I think there's a really good opportunity to bring those two back together. The answer to your question, who decides, are the local GPs, the clinical commissioning group for Croydon. Maybe we can talk about that more afterwards. Chris, on the care system, actually one of the problems with these hustings is we concentrate too much on trying to knock spots off each other. One thing the Labour Council deserves credit for is moving to pay the living wage, and I understand that is now applying to that contract for care staff, and that's something I very strongly support, and I think that they deserve credit for. The last question, didn't catch the gentleman's name about Wales. I thought he made a very, very good point. Actually, one of the beauties about devolution is that you can now compare political parties' records. You don't have to look at the government and then try and work out whether you believe the opposition parties. There is a clear comparison here between the NHS in England and the NHS in Wales, and you can see on cancer times, A&E times, ambulance response times, which system is delivering best. It's very difficult sometimes, Glenn, in these hustings to get whether we actually get to the sort of light behind the issue, because there's a political debate going on. And actually, I think the truth about our NHS is that it is under real pressure. The population is growing, there are more and more elderly people with chronic conditions, but actually in many ways it has improved. It improved under the last Labour government, and it's improved further under this coalition government. My final fact for you, if you like, is that there is an annual survey done that measures public satisfaction with and dissatisfaction with our NHS. And in the last year, 2014, we got the second ever best score on satisfaction and the lowest ever score on the number of people dissatisfied with the NHS. So is our NHS in Croydon perfect? Absolutely not. But is it doing quite a bit better than it was 4 or 5 years ago? Yes, it is.
Thank you very much. Peter Staveley.
Yes. Just to be absolutely clear, we are determined that the NHS will be free at the point of use. We will not pay. You will not pay to see the GP or go to hospitals, which other parties, or at least one party, has said. We are firmly against the PFI arrangements. We will end them as soon as we economically can. They are extremely expensive source of finance. It's much cheaper to borrow if you have to borrow, and that's what they really are. They're just disguised borrowing. Regarding carers, we think carers are extremely important, and we want to increase their allowance up to the same level as the job seekers' allowance, which is currently £73, 10 pence a week. And you may ask, how will we fund all this? Well, unlike the other political parties, we set a gold standard with our manifesto in that we have had our manifesto independently audited by the Centre for Economics and Business Research. And they've asked us lots of tough questions, and we've had to justify where our figures have come from. We've identified £32 billion a year of savings, and one of the places that we are using those savings is to put the extra money into the NHS. So we are fully funded with real money.
Thank you very much. Back on the NHS, James Fearnley.
Yeah, I think, as Gavin probably acknowledged, there wasn't enough funding in the 1990s under the Conservative government in infrastructure, hospital infrastructure. And I think the Labour government did a good job of recognising that and actually investing in a health service. I think no one will worry about that. I do worry about the credibility of Andy Burnham presenting himself as a saviour of the NHS, the guy who's going to protect it against privatisation, when he was Health Secretary in a Labour administration, when private involvement did go up. However, it is worth us recognising that private involvement has always existed in the NHS to some degree, and it's never exceeded 5.8%. So it's not going to increase, as far as I'm concerned, in substantial measures. I am committed, as the Lib Dem are, to the NHS remaining free at the point of use. I think all political parties are, and they certainly should be, and we want to make sure that it stays as the National Health Service. It's fundamentally the right thing to do. I think we've got to get rid of that layer of politicisation and make sure it has the funding it needs. Just two further quick points. I think the NHS is the best health service in the world. I never want to go down an American-style system. It's been ranked as the best health service in the world. We've got 8,000 more doctors, 1,000 more nurses in the NHS now than when we came into power. And so I think it's worth recognising the fantastic job that everyone in the health service does for us, and I think that we've got to stop kicking it around like a political football.
Thank you very much. April.
Yes, there is a 30 billion shortfall in the NHS at the moment, and one of the ways we can pay for it is cancelling the PFI debt. TUSC is completely opposed to any privatisation in the NHS. We want to get rid of the purchaser-provider split, which makes the whole thing more costly, like one part of the NHS is purchasing from the other, one part they're just providing. That is really quite costly. Unfortunately, because of the cuts in social care, the NHS, the beds in hospitals is being silted up because there's no way for people who may need to rehabilitation to go out into the community. So, that is silting up, and so there's why waiting times have gone up in the past year in the NHS as a whole. So, we would be opposing all those cuts in social care so people can get more care in the community. As I said, one way we would be funding it is to cancel the PFI debt, and we'd be talking about nationalisation of the big pharmaceutical companies just on COVID need. One of the things that I work a Unison rep. One of the things that we put forward was the ethical care charter about people working in social care, having the London living wage, paying for travel time, and abolishing zero-hour contracts. So we've been campaigning on that, and it's good some councils have taken up the London living wage and campaigning on the ethical care charter. So that is important, because unless you get good wages, good staff training, etc., then you're not going to get a good enough service. And unfortunately, there is a lot of staffing cuts, and we do need more staffing in the NHS. But I just want to be clear, we're completely opposed to any privatising the NHS. And unfortunately, the clinical commissioning groups, where the doctors are now contracting services, more and more of them are going to private contracts. That's a fact of the matter. They're more and more going to private contracts, and we're completely opposed to that. There should be no winning of private contracts at all in the NHS.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Sarah Jones.
So I think we should focus on the problems that exist right now rather than comparing it to something else or somewhere else. And the problems right now here in Croydon are that for 34 weeks in a row the hospital has broken its A&E targets, that thousands of people are struggling to see a GP, that ambulances, when I talk to ambulance staff, they are desperate for more support because they cannot get to people quickly enough and they cannot do the job they want to do. When I worked in a hospital, we had to go and recruit nurses from abroad because we couldn't get them here because we're not training and encouraging enough nurses in this country. There is a problem that we need to fix, and I believe only the Labour Party will do that. On privatisation, it's true that the recent contracts, 40% of all the new contracts have gone to private providers. I've been part of that process myself because I've worked in a hospital where I've seen contracts going to private providers. Virgin, I have significant worries about, as do all the staff who work in the hospital. It is incredibly difficult to get A&E staff to work in Croydon's A&E because of Virgin, because they take all the easy cases and the NHS have to do the hard cases. If you're an emergency A&E doctor, you go to King's or you go anywhere, you don't go to Croydon. It's a real problem, and I'm very much in favour of cancelling that contract and bringing it back together. Care UK is an absolutely classic example of the Tories privatising something, halving people's wages. I mean, it's extraordinary. Again, on the doorstep, I've met so many carers who work for Care UK who were on £11 an hour, now on £6.50. They can't pay their bills. The taxpayer is having to subsidise them. It's ridiculous, and nobody gets better care as a result. And in terms of the NHS in Wales, well, the NHS in Wales has been making more progress in recent years than in England. And when the Tories were last in charge of the NHS in Wales, people had to wait 2 years for an operation. So let's just get real. The Nuffield Trust, which is an independent organisation, has said that Wales is making progress. It doesn't help to compare Wales to England. What we should do, and what good MPs, what good candidates should do, is look at the problems and come up with some solutions, which is what the Labour Party has done.
Thank you.
Glenn, I've not had an answer to my question.
Well,
why is the satisfaction level in Wales 51%?
Because the Welsh were cut by a Tory government.
It's not true.
Okay.
The average Welsh person gets more contribution from central government than in England and in Scotland.
Okay.
It's not an excuse.
Thank you for that.
Can I have an answer to my question? Why is it 51%,
They've
Sarah?
been making more progress in recent years than the NHS in England.
So 51% is progress, is it?
Okay.
More than it was, yes.
Thank you very much. And finally, on the NHS, Esther Sutton.
Sir, I'm absolutely against privatisation in the NHS. And in fact, the Green Party is seeking to pass an NHS reinstatement bill, which has two key principles: to say that the profit motive has no place in healthcare, and to remove the market mechanism, which is costing billions and is smoothing the way for privatisation. In terms of Mayday and Croydon University Hospitals, we would look to decentralise healthcare responsibility, funding and decision-making to local government and clinicians, which would ensure that service levels and national guidelines are followed. And in terms of carers, Chris, carers are crucial in the community, and this absolutely needs to be reflected in their pay.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Okay, we're going to go on. We're going to have one more question, and then each of the candidates will have 2 minutes at the end to say as they wish. Before we go on to that question, just a couple of bits of housekeeping. First of all, I'd like to thank SAFE and for providing Matthew's Yard as a fantastic venue for us this evening. Happy third birthday to you. And if you're enjoying this and would like some more another debate before the election on Saturday evening at this very venue, Croydon Citizen is hosting a head-to-head between Gavin, Barwell and Sarah Jones from 7:30 to 9 p.m. Doors open at 7:15. Free entry, all welcome. Is that right? There you go. Last question. This is an interesting one. This is probably the biggest development that's obviously within the last Parliament. Will be when it's built within the next Parliament. But an interesting perspective on it. Is Kevin on Render here? No, he's not here. Okay. The question is: will the Westfield development harm local jobs and take money out of the local economy? Start with Gavin Barwell.
It's an interesting question. I don't think it will harm local jobs in terms of the number of jobs in Croydon. In fact, quite the reverse. It's clearly going to bring very significant numbers of jobs, both in construction and in retail. But as I tried to say, Glenn, in my opening remarks, my real passion for this redevelopment is because I think it is a way to change Croydon's reputation and to bring back some of those companies that used to base themselves here, to bring back those professional jobs that we want to see in the town. So overall for jobs, I think it is a good thing. I think that there is, however, in politics, one of the things I've learned over the 5 years is that whenever you get good news, it can actually have also some difficult consequences to it. And so the difficulty for us, I think, with this scheme is how we manage the period of the build and how we make sure that local small businesses don't go out of business during the difficult period when we're getting the transition to the new scheme. And I very much hope, first of all, that the local council will look at providing some financial help to those businesses in terms of the business rate scheme. I also think we need to work very hard to try and make sure that Westfield and Hammerson fulfil the promises they made as part of the planning application, to ensure that as many of the jobs that are created as possible go to local young people. Now, under this government, unemployment in Croydon has halved. It is an incredible achievement. And most of those jobs have been permanent, reasonably well-paid jobs. Not all of them, but most of them. There is an opportunity, if we get this right, to actually get to the dream of full employment in Croydon, where everybody that wants a job has a chance to have one. But that's going to require really close working between the council, the developer, and our FE colleges and schools. So I'm passionate about seeing that happening. And finally, again, it's really important that Steve O'Connell, our GLA member, has a key role to play in this, in making sure that the improvements to our transport infrastructure that are needed happen at the same time as the development. Because what would be tragic is to have the new scheme built and disruptive work still underway on the road network and the tram system. So there's a lot of things that need managing, and you need an MP that has got a grip of this project and that has been involved in it from the very outset.
Thank you very much. Peter Staveley. Well, I'll let you come in after everyone's had an answer. Peter Staveley.
I'm cautiously optimistic about the Westfield development. I think, on the whole, it is going to improve Croydon an awful lot. It's going to bring in lots of jobs and a lot of investment. My only real worry is how the project is going to be managed, and are the developers going to actually do what they say they're going to do, what's on the planning permission. I suspect that they may well not. They may well reduce the amount of housing or affordable housing that's available. They might not provide all the contributions to the improvements in the infrastructure. So I think there's going to need to be a lot of scrutiny of what the developers are doing, and also when they're doing it, to make sure they provide it at the right time. As I think I mentioned in my answer to the first question, there needs to be a lot of communication from the developers and indeed council to the residents, so that they know exactly what is different this week compared to last week and what will be different next week, and also to businesses. Small businesses are going to be very affected by Westfield, and we need to protect them, and certainly if I was elected, that's one of the things I would want to do.
Thank you very much. James Fearnley.
It's the right project at the right time. I think it's absolutely right for Croydon that we go ahead with this development. I think Peter picked up on a point there about scrutiny, and I think it's really important that the MP plays a role in scrutinising what works and what we have concerns over. And one of the concerns that we've identified as Liberal Democrats is whether or not the Dingwall road loop should go ahead, whether we can actually have longer trams and more capacity on the network. We want to work with TfL to see whether that's a viable project instead, because it may well end up, if we have a Dingwall road loop, that trams get stopped short of many stops and deprive business of traffic. So I want to work with TfL to see whether we can refine that project and refine where we're going with that particular plan. And the third thing I'd say is we've got to incentivise employers to take on young people. We've done that in government. We've made sure that we've broadened the apprenticeship grants. We've taken away punitive taxes on national insurance for young recruits, and we've got to do more of that. And I also think it's down to the MP to bring groups together to make sure that you're acting as that advocate and that conduit between groups to bring business, jobs, schools and everyone together. I think you've got to judge us on the panel as whether we can do a good enough job being that strong advocate and being the middle person between all those different community groups.
Thank you very much. April Ashton.
Well, I suppose when we look to see, is Westfield a good development for central Croydon? We have to look at many aspects, don't we? So, for example, what sort of jobs are they going to be bringing into Croydon? They said there's going to be 5,000 jobs. But what are the basis of these 5,000 jobs? Are they going to be paying the London living wage in the shops? Are they going to be offering apprentices? Will there be zero-hour contracts for these jobs? So that's the sort of thing you need to look to when they talk about, is that good for young people in Croydon? Again, local shops. You know, what are the rents going to be in Westfield when Westfield comes up. Local business able to stay in that centre, or be local business be driven out of central Croydon because they can't afford the rents now in central Croydon. Again, when we look at housing, what's going to happen to the housing? Is there going to be enough affordable housing? We said already, affordable housing, that's 8% of market rent. What's going to happen? Is it going to be just luxury appointments? So all these people will be driven out of the centre of Croydon. I know where I'm working in Sutton, they've had developments, but unfortunately there's lots of social cleansing, and all these people are driven out of where the development is. So that's when you look at it. And also Westfield themselves, you know, when they have their tax, they look at their tax arrangements. Are they going to be investing their profits back into central Croydon, or are they going to have an offshore haven and take the money out of Croydon? So when you look at these sort of things, you can see, is it really going to benefit central Croydon, or is it just going to benefit Westfield and those big companies? And obviously there's the environmental considerations we have to look at. You know, you're going to be living on a building site for many years, and things like that. So, you know, there's many aspects of it. And Westfield promises a lot, but is it really going to help local people in Croydon? And that's what you have to look at.
Thank you very much. Sarah Jones.
I think the first thing that businesses need is certainty, and so the first thing I would be doing as an MP is banging on the door of government and the council and everybody responsible to make sure this actually goes ahead, that it happens, that we get the final agreement we need, and that businesses are given as much support as they need over the period of transition. I think there are lots of issues with Westfield that are good, and there are lots of issues that could be bad if we don't manage it properly. Now, I was a senior civil servant on the Olympics and worked with Tessa Jow when, you remember, Westfield came to Stratford, and there was a lot of planning that went in to try and make sure that jobs went to local people, that there was 30% of the housing was affordable, and that the advantages were seen after the Olympics for people who lived locally. Now here we have 10% only of the housing that's being developed as part of Westfield being affordable, which I think is criminally low. And I hope that if there's any new housing development planned as part of that, well, I know, because Tony Newman is now leader of the council and has changed the affordable housing limits, that there'll be more affordable housing within that. For businesses, we need to make sure we're using as many of the central spaces that we can, that businesses are moved in there and into other available venues as well. We need a Labour government who will reduce your business rates, because under the Tories you're paying £1,500 more in business rates, of course. So we need a Labour government to reduce those business rates, and we need to give those businesses as much support as we possibly can. And let's not forget all of the out-of-town centres that unfortunately have been forgotten over the last few years, like the Portland Road, like the Addiscombe Road. They all need support as well. So we need to look at Croydon as a whole, and what can Westfield give all of us, not just how can it make the developers the money that they no doubt will make as a result of it.
Thank you, Sarah. Esther Sutton.
I think that potentially Westfield could be divisive, and I think we need to be cautious. We need to offer real support for local businesses who could suffer, especially, as Sarah mentioned, the relocation to Central or business rate relief. Also, the construction process needs to be managed very carefully. With trucks and dust moving in and out of the town centre, the air quality is going to be atrocious for residents in the town centre. In terms of jobs, we need to be ensuring that the developers are offering apprenticeships to local young people and well-paid jobs during the construction process. And then there needs to be a variety of employment opportunities once the centre has been built, not just in low-paid retail jobs, but a wide variety of jobs. We also need to ensure that there will be penalties if timescales aren't adhered to. With the worst-case scenario that things go wrong and this takes much, much longer than anyone anticipates, and the town centre is chaos for years. So there needs to be tight timescales and penalties if these aren't met. But what I'd like to end on is that the regeneration of Croydon, it can't just be about bricks and mortar, and I think that there's some amazing things going on in Croydon without a new shopping centre. There's certainly amazing cultural endeavours happening right here, and it's Rise Gallery, all over the place. So I think we need to kind of tap into that real sense of optimism that's in the town at the moment and ride it.
Thank you very much. And Martin Cameron.
Well, I have a friend who lives in Shepherd's Bush, and I've explored that area extensively, and I like that area. I like the Westfields that's there. I like the parallel economies. The local trading is thriving. Westfield seems to be doing well as well. So I can see why this idea is extremely attractive. But I'm a bit worried that in the absence of a viable alternative to the current plan, that this is being railroaded through. And I'm hearing many valid objections. Very people are worried that this could go horribly wrong. Well, I didn't like this disruption of Tramlink, and this disruption is going to be damn sight worse, I'm sure. So I'm very worried that in the absence of a viable alternative, this is going to be railroaded through, and it's not going to be good for the environment. So I don't, certainly in the short term, the local trading sector is going to suffer badly, I'm sure. I mean, maybe eventually, 10, 15 years' time, it will all settle down and pick up wonderfully. But I would say no to this project. Well, no to building it on the Wicked site. Now, on Thursday, I suggested an idea that I thought might be terribly controversial, but I thought about it since. I think about an alternative is to build a Westfield on Croydon Airport. I mean, does anybody think that's an absolutely appalling idea? Yeah. Because we build it there, we build it there, and all the objections to the use of the Wicked site are immediately dealt with. We build it there, but the local traders, we can work on the local traders at the same time. They can migrate to the Westfield site if they want to, in their own time, when it's right for their business to do so. We can work on developing Wicked in parallel to a new Westfield, created without massive disruption. Anyway, so yeah. if we have a viable alternative, and there are pros and cons to doing it.
Okay.
Different ways, there are pros and cons, and I'd like you to look at the pros and cons and to choose based on choice, not to sort of railroad.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Gentleman at the front, you wanted to make a contribution, and then
whilst it's great to regenerate the town centre, one of the risks, we've met with Sharon Thompson, the director of Tramlink, and she is very concerned that by painting a zebra crossing across Wellesley Road, basically, we curtail 50% of future trams crossing Croydon. Their TfL are being forced to produce 2 loops. The first is 24 million Dingwall Road, another one down at Roos Corner, to basically turn the trams back. The brownfield housing that we want to encourage in Wadden, along the Purley Way, they won't be able to get to East Croydon Station, their station, to get to London, because not enough trams will be able to cross Croydon.
Come back very briefly on that specific point, Gavin Barwell.
Two things. On Marsden's point, I think we've really made a mistake on Thursday night by just letting it ride and not say why it's a terrible idea. It's a terrible idea because Purley Way playing fields are metropolitan open land. I don't want to build on metropolitan open land. And it's a terrible idea because if you put the new shopping centre there, it'll destroy all the retail business in the town centre. Yes. So it's not a good idea. In terms of the tram loop, this is a classic example of how, when you have a piece of good news, it does cause lots of complications. Actually, the reason the loop is required is not the zebra crossing. It's because in order to reconfigure the road network, you can't have the same number of trams crossing Wellesley Road.
The director of Tramlink says they are opposite.
You've got to reconfigure the tram system if you want to make the new road system that is necessary.
Thank you, Gavin. Okay, a couple of people very quickly.
Just quickly, I mean, Gavin prefaced the whole of his opening speech with "I think." Well, I think is not good enough for a project that could be a disaster. And even Peter said maybe. Maybe it's not good enough for a project that could be a disaster.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we need to get on to
one very quick point.
Very quickly.
One very quick point on Westfield, and the gentleman here linked to it. Will the road system work? Will the traffic work? Will the transport work? It hasn't been demonstrated so far.
Okay, very briefly, sir. Very briefly.
It is mental health, so I know it's not a subject. I have to call you out again, Gavin. What you said about being full employment in Croydon. Croydon Job Centre is one of the worst in London with sanctions. At the same time, what do you think happens to those people when they're half-starved and hungry because someone in the job centre has been forced to stitch them up in some way?
Okay, that's a direct question, but very, very quickly, and then we'll get on with the final. Thank you. Thank you.
And you starve them. It's not a good thing. It is either thing when we're wrong.
Okay, thank you.
Very quickly, it is certainly the case that sometimes bad decisions are made, and I see that as a constituency MP and I try and deal with it. But this myth that is put about by parts of the left that the fall in unemployment is all due to sanctions is an absolute nonsense. There are 2 million more people in this country in work. That's real data from people paying national insurance. And that is the highest number of people that we have ever had in work in this country, the highest percentage of people ever in work in this country. Are things economically perfect at the moment, Glenn? No. But have we made real strides in getting more people to work? Undeniably, yes.
But we have a horrible situation where some people are well taken care of and some are not taken care of at all.
Right, okay, what I'm going to do now
Back
is
to this generation, discussed it.
Tripled in a year.
everybody have the final 2 minutes. I realise that time is beating us now. Before I do that, I'm going to start from the far end, so just to give you all a word of warning, I'm going to come that way down. I'd just like to say, just a little bit of self-indulgence, Ian Austin is at the back of the room. Embarrassing now. He's probably not going to stand up, right? But Ian is our local government guru, correspondent, whatever you want to call him. He's worked with us for 46 years, which is very, that's a lot of elections. It's a very long time, yes. And he's retiring in the next month, and I'd just like to place on record my thanks and appreciation. I'm sure anyone who's read the Advertiser over the last 46 years for his wonderful coverage of the local political scene, and for bringing it all to light for everybody here. So thank you, Ian, and Okay, so 2 minutes each to close with, and we'll start with James Fearnley.
5 years ago, I would never have imagined that I'd be stood in front of you today as a member of a governing party. Few people would ever have expected that the policies that formed our 2010 manifesto would be implemented by the next government. But that's what happened. 3/4 of those policies were implemented in the coalition programme. Those priorities were raising the income tax threshold, investing in the poorest school children through the pupil premium, which became a flagship coalition policy. With a liberal heart within the coalition, these policies have started the work of building a fairer society, delivering opportunity for all. Now, I don't deny that we're in tough economic circumstances. The policies that we've taken forward over the past 5 years are making a difference in people's lives. They're making Britain a more liberal country. But I think there's much more that we can do. That's why I want to build on our record of delivery over the past 5 years with a promise of more. We can say that we'll finish the job of balancing the books fairly because we've started that job in this Parliament. The deficit's cut in half, record numbers of people in work, unemployment is down from 8% to 5.7%. We can say we'll protect education funding from nursery to 19 because we've done that in this Parliament. We've taken literally millions of extra money and invested it here in Croydon through the pupil premium. We can say we've increased health funding and invested in mental health. We protected the NHS budget. We will do that again. We've introduced the first ever waiting times for mental health. That's our priority in the next Parliament. We want to make sure people get the right funding to tackle mental health. Britain's at a crossroads at the moment as far as I'm concerned. I don't want to see us lurch to the right or lurch to the left. I want an optimistic, free, open, tolerant Croydon and Britain. And that's why I think it's really important that Liberal Democrats are present and part of the next government. Thank
you. Next, Peter Staveley.
Good evening. Throughout the answers I've given this evening, hopefully I've shown you that Ukip has lots of policies about all things that affect your life. I've mentioned about the additional funding for the NHS. I don't think I've actually mentioned that we want to increase the personal allowance so that people who are on the minimum wage, which by the way we want to enforce to get people off to higher than the minimum wage as soon as possible, but people on minimum wage will not be paying income tax. There's no point in them paying tax and be on allowance at the same time. However, some things I haven't mentioned are a reduction in foreign aid. That's one of the things that will pay for the increase in the NHS. But just for clarity, it's been mentioned today that the Nepal earthquake disaster is exactly the sort of thing that we would keep the residual foreign aid budget for. So we won't pay it into corrupt countries or dictators, we'll pay it to those humanitarian issues. But I've gone, an hour and 3/4 now, and I haven't mentioned the EU. So I think my life is not worth living unless I do mention it. Sorry. Just go off to the pub or something for a minute. Obviously, we want to come out of the European Union. It's a political construct. If we were outside the EU, we would be their biggest exporters. So they need us more than we need them. So I guarantee that within 24 hours of coming out of the European Union, we would have a trade deal, as indeed loads of other countries around the world have trade deals with the EU.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Thank you very much. Gavin Barwell.
I was going to buy Peter a beer if we got through the hustings without mentioning the EU. Got very close, but just fell short at the end. Well, look, Glenn, there are two things that people are choosing when they vote on Simple May. They're choosing who they want to run the country for the next 5 years, and they're choosing who they want to be their local MP. At a national level, the choice is between David Cameron or Ed Miliband propped up by the SNP. There's no way Labour are going to win an overall majority with the seats they're going to lose in Scotland. That's the choice. You have to make your mind up who you think would be the better party to work with.
You're not going to
Okay.
I won't work with Ukip under any circumstances, neither will
Thank you.
At a local level, I believe I've got a real record to run on. I'm incredibly passionate about this town. I've had the best job in the world for the last 5 years, fighting for my hometown in Parma. And I hope tonight I've been able to demonstrate some of that record, talking about the work that we've done to get Westfield and Hammerston to this point, talking about the extra funding, 7-fold increase we've got in money for the council in terms of new school places, working with the hospital trust to get the investment for a new A&E department at our local hospital, the Help to Buy scheme to try and help our young people have a chance to get onto the housing level, the work I did through my private members bill to try and tackle discrimination against those with mental health problems, and the work I did with the Advertiser to help the family of William Groves to address the unfairness that they faced, changing the law in relation to drug driving. You know, both things are important when you choose who to vote for this election. It's important who's running the country, and for me, David Cameron is clearly the right choice. But it's also too important to have an MP with a clear record of getting things done. An MP who's got a grasp of the detail and the facts that can do a good job for Croydon, can do a good job working across parties, bringing the money and the investment that we need in this town. So I'm proud of my record. I'm proud to have had this incredible opportunity over the last 5 years to represent this town. And I ask you to give me the chance to carry on doing it for the next 5 years. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, why vote for me? Why do you want me as your MP in Croydon Central? You know, this upstart who's come from nowhere and started a new political party in only a few months. Well, you know, this isn't a last-minute cobbled-together thing. I've been actively interested in politics and psychology all my life. I'm a trained therapist and I'm a trained life coach, and I have facilitation and mediation skills, and I have a reputation for standing up for the underdog. I've done so in mental health in Croydon for the last 10 years. There's probably not a service user in Croydon who doesn't know me and welcomes my support. I also see children as underdogs, and I see older people as underdogs. And I'm very concerned about racism. A lot of my friends are black men who've got serious problems. So, you know, if anybody who's an underdog, I will be a champion for. You know, as your MP, I will lobby for all the policies on this list. You know, fine-tuned with input from you, and I will lobby for everything I've said today. And more importantly, you know, about customer feedback, you channel your complaints through me. I will make sure that ministers don't fob you off. I have abilities in the communication area, I know how to cut through nonsense from people who've got stripes on their shoulders. They don't intimidate me. I can cut through their nonsense and get them to see sense. I can even get Camden and Miliband's to understand each other. That's my claim. And yeah, so some policies. Europe and Scotland needs to be solved with bottom-up subsidiarity. Subsidiarity decided from the bottom up. If the UK wants to exclude itself from certain European laws, it should be able to do so without approval. And if Scotland wants to exempt itself from UK laws, the same. And if Europe wants to challenge us about it, if they want to take us to the European court, let them. And if we win, we win. And if we lose, we get out of Europe. No faffing around. No faffing around with referendum.
That's it. Thank you very much.
We either get what we want or we get out.
Cheers. Thank you very much. Esther Sutton.
I'm born and bred in Croydon. I've lived and worked here most of my life. And I've got two lovely children at Croydon schools. I've run pubs in the town centre for 15 years, and I'm really proud to be part of our wonderful community. I joined the Green Party 8 years ago because I was really concerned about climate change and environmental chaos, but also because of the party's values of social justice, fairness, equality and compassion. The Green Party stands for action on climate change, but we also stand for fair wages for everyone, for public services, for a free public NHS. We want to bring railways back into public hands. We want to tackle air pollution. We want to provide genuinely affordable housing. But we're also about building community and fostering small businesses and about cultural endeavour as well. So if you have concerns about the environment and the protection of public services, if you want a sustainable economy and the quality of our democracy is uppermost in your mind, I'd urge you to vote Green.
So there are 7 people standing before you tonight. In 10 days' time there'll just be 1, and you get to decide, you and the people of Croydon Central. I think we've seen a choice tonight between a failing Tory plan and a better plan from Labour. The Tories like to talk about their record. Gavin likes to talk about his record, but the truth is he voted against an £8 minimum wage in Parliament and he voted for a tax break for millionaires. His party believes that if you give in to powerful interests and if you give tax breaks to those at the very top, somehow everything will trickle down to the rest of us. And this approach simply does not work. Let's look at the facts. Childcare bills have rocketed. Working people are £1,600 worse off than they were. The NHS is in crisis. For the first time in nearly 100 years, people in Croydon will actually be worse off at the end of a parliament than they were at the start. And because of the shameful record of this government in terms of building new housing and trebling tuition fees, this generation might not be better off than the last. And it doesn't have to be that way. So Labour will pay down the deficit, but we'll do it fairly. We'll freeze energy bills, we'll provide 25 hours free childcare, and we'll provide hope for millions of a decent home. We'll give 44,000 people in Croydon a tax break through a lower starting rate of tax, we'll put up the minimum wage, and we'll repeal the bedroom tax. I know how precious our NHS is, we all do, and that's why our first priority has to be the NHS, to invest in doctors and nurses, to bring health and social care together, and to guarantee a GP appointment in 48 hours. Now, I know politics isn't perfect, far from it. I'm not a career politician, I've had a career outside of politics for 20 years. And I know we won't always agree, but let me promise you one thing. If I am your MP, I will never stop listening and I will never stop working by your side. So I hope you will decide to vote for Labour so that we can all fight for a better Croydon together. Thank you.
Finally, April.
Yes, thanks a lot. The Trade Unions and Socialist Coalition is the only anti-austerity party. The main 3 parties, Liberal, Tories and fortunate Labour as well, have voted for £30 billion worth of cuts over the next period. And what will that mean for public services? Local government cuts, could be short start centres, libraries, leisure facilities, social care, etc. university fees. There's a housing crisis. We know all about that already. Youth unemployment is still quite so high. And the Tories are proposing an end to social housing with doing the right to buy for a housing association. They are privatising the NHS, and we don't know how education will fare. There has been a massive drop in wages over the past few years. Public sector wages spent 20% cuts in their wages. And we've already said 1 million people have been resorted to food banks over the past year, tripled over the past year. That is what the Tories have already had, and there will be more in store over the next period. And so after the next election, they said recession is supposed to be over. We're no longer in recession, we're supposed to be no longer in recession. But austerity will continue until 2020 if Labour or the Tories are in power. So TUSC is saying that we didn't cause, working people didn't cause a recession, so why are we paying for the recession? The banks caused the recession, but we're still paying for it. But unfortunately, the profits of the banks, the bonuses, are still going up. But we're getting poorer and our children are getting poorer. So that's why we're saying no to austerity. But who's going to pay for it? People are asking who's going to pay for it. There's one more thing. Britain is the 6th richest country in the world. Who's going to pay for the deficit? Who's going to be paid for
Thank you very much.
to go through? And I'm saying just one more thing. There's 120 billion pounds that the rich are avoiding in tax and tax evasion. They have to pay for it, and the bank should pay for it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. All that remains is I'd like to thank again Matthew John for providing a great venue. Thank you to the candidates for an excellent debate, and thank you all for coming and attending and posting your questions. I'm sorry if we didn't get through all of them, but I hope you've enjoyed the evening and found it worthwhile. You can read all about it on Friday on our website. So thank you very much.
Skeptics, talk to me before you go out. If you're sceptical, talk to me before you go out.